The reputation of the Ethiopians has changed over the years. In some cases, especially when it came to the Moors, they were seen as giants, and in some cases, they were seen as holier than any other. In the case of the men who exist to the south of Egypt, their reputation is exactly the same: ferocious, beautiful, tall, and intimidating. In fact, they're mentioned by so many authors from different nations as world famous. An interesting phrase to use for an entire population. What does it say about the other populations that this is the one that is famed above the others? If we look at certain verses from ancient books, whether they be religious or not, we see that the general sentiment is that these people, the Ethiopians that dwell just under Egypt, are one of astonishing and surprising talents. Beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, there is a land where the sound of wings is heard. From that land, ambassadors come down the Nile in boats made of reeds, go back home, swift messengers, take a message back to your land divided by rivers, to your strong and powerful nation, to your tall and smooth-skinned people, who are feared all over the world. Listen, everyone who lives on earth, look for a signal flag to be raised on the mountaintops. Listen for the blowing of the bugle. The Lord said to me, I will look down from heaven as quietly as the dew forms in the warm nights of harvest, as serenely as the sun shines in the heat of the day, before the grapes are gathered, when the blossoms have all fallen and the grapes are ripening. The enemy will destroy the Ethiopians as easily as a knife cuts branches from a vine. The corpses of their soldiers will be left exposed to the birds and the wild animals. In summer, the birds will feed on them, and in winter, the animals. A time is coming when the Lord Almighty will receive offerings from this land, divided by rivers. This strong and powerful nation, this tall and smooth-skinned people who are feared all over the world, they will come to Mount Zion, where the Lord Almighty is worshipped. Now, of course, there's a lot to be said about that verse. Firstly, obviously, it's being written about Israel and how they have competition in the form of the Ethiopians. But let us mention a few things. One, they mentioned that beyond Ethiopia, meaning that the lands that go even further south than probably Sudan and the Meroitic regions, they are talking about how these people travel even further south than that, and that even those people who are way to the south will find themselves in Israel. Secondly, it's interesting that they're described as smooth skin instead of dark skin, which is a interesting fact. It might be perhaps because they share a skin color and that the notice of skin is something else, but also it might be a reference to them looking at them as physically attractive, and so describing their skin with a positive, even though they're clearly referenced as an enemy. Mention of the Ethiopians and the Egyptians together make it obvious that these people believed that the Ethiopians were just another version of the Egyptians. While mentioning Ethiopia, they also mention Egypt. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on the horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots, and in great strength of their horsemen, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel, or seek help from the Lord. Yet he too is wise and can bring disaster. He does not take back his words. He will rise up against the house of the wicked, against those who help evildoers. But the Egyptians are men and not God. Their horses are flesh and not spirit. When the Lord stretches out his hand, he who helps will stumble. He who is helped will fall. Both will perish together. Staying with Isaiah, he continues to talk about the Ethiopians, but in the same sense, referring to their height as he did earlier, because of course, the reputation of the Ethiopians is that they're giants, because of course, they were very tall, especially the Sudanese back then. The mention of their smooth skin and the similarities that is drawn between them, the Sabaeans, and the Egyptians makes it seem like they are one of the same group. Their power is beyond them, and their goods are even bigger. The Sabaeans are located in Yemen, the Ethiopians obviously in Ethiopia, and the Egyptians in Egypt. The interesting part is that no other kingdom is mentioned here as the rivals of these people in this verse, but instead these are mentioned together. In between the Sabaeans and the Israelites are some nomads which were known in ancient biblical times, but they are not mentioned either. It seems like they are mentioning places of high repute in this verse. Thus saith the Lord, the labor of Egypt, and merchandise of Ethiopia, and of the Sabaeans, men of stature, shall come over unto thee, and they shall be thine. They shall come after thee in chains. They shall come over, and they shall fall down unto thee. They shall make supplication unto thee, saying, Surely God is in thee, and there is none else. There is no God. Now let me apologize for the next verse that is from Amos 9:7. And the reason why I'm going to apologize is because I've said it before, but I've talked to some people who are religious about this verse, people of note, and they seem to come to the same conclusion based on everything else that I've read that is written after the sentence about the Ethiopians. So I apologize to those who don't like repetition, and to everyone who believes in thoroughness, you're welcome. So let's first read it. Are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel? Saith the Lord, have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Syrians from Ker? Now, first I interpret this as them saying, or the people of Israel saying, or God saying, that Israel came out of Egypt. But the real interpretation is that he is comparing Israel being freed from the Egyptians as the people of Egypt moving back into Israel or being freed from the Egyptians. And he is comparing that to other places being freed from the others as well. So, for example, the Philistines from Caphtor, meaning that the Philistines were freed from the people of Crete, and the Syrians from Ker, meaning that the Syrians were freed from the people of Persia. And then he says, so let's read again. Are ye not as the children of Ethiopians unto me, saith the Lord? Have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt. It's clear here that there is a double meaning. The first meaning that he has physically brought them out of Egypt, but then secondly, the fact that he has converted these people into the religion that they believe in him. Now, if we are to believe this verse, this means that the Israelites were not the only people who believed in God. Not only that, it also means that the people of Ethiopia are regarded as Egyptians. And possibly, even though I couldn't get anybody to agree with this, the Israelites might themselves be Ethiopians. With the history of conquest of the Egyptians over Israel, it would not be a surprise to me that people from Ethiopia or Africa in general ended up in Israel in mass numbers. It also wouldn't shock me if the people of Israel ended up in Egypt in mass numbers, even though it's not in the context of the Bible where it's slaves, but instead people moving down. If we move away from the Bible for 2 seconds, we know that in the Sinai region, and I know I mention this every time, but I have to, in the Sinai region, there are mines located in that area that were worked by both people from Israel and people from Egypt. These were not the names of the lands at the time. In fact, I think the people in Israel were Canaanites at this time. It is not a coincidence that the languages spoken within the Sinai region, Egypt, the Sabaeans, the Ethiopians, the Israelites, it is not a coincidence that they all belong to the same family. It's not a coincidence that we find graves and also cities or locations dedicated to both Egyptians and Canaanites, and even later on, Greek Egyptians in the Sinai region. It's obvious that these people cross paths all the time. Whatever the DNA of the ancient Egyptians, they would have absolutely fused with the Israelites over and over again. Now, the Proto-Sinaitic languages, they go back 2000 BC, show a very early fusion of people. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, so if there's a fusion of these people, how do they know today what race they're looking for, what people they're looking for? The answer is they don't. The answer is most of the time they just look for signs of the people who live there today, and anything they don't like, they toss it out. The giants of Ethiopia, the Bible, the Egyptian texts, the ruins, the languages, all of these are clear evidence that these people not only interacted, but were ultimately a giant break from the same initial foundation. They would believe in the same traditions, culture, religions, and even ones that are thought to be exclusive to certain regions, like the Judeo religion, is clearly spread throughout the regions, the Sinai being one of them. And remember, in the Sinai regions is where the Nubians used to cast out their prisoners. Now, obviously, we should not be one-sided, and we should mention the side of the Ethiopians and the Egyptians of how they felt about the people of Israel. And to help us, we have a stele, a victory stele over the people of Israel. Merenptah was a pharaoh, and he wrote the stele before the Bible was even thought up, or even any version of the Bible. And this is what he had to say about the people who surrounded him. Year 5, third month of summer, day 3, under the majesty of the falcon-headed god of kinship, Horus, mighty bull, rejoicing in Ma'at, divine universal order and the god of that order, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Baneri, Meremem, the son of Ra, Merenptah, content with Ma'at, magnified by the power, exalted by the strength of Horus, strong bull who smites the 9 bows, whose name is given to eternal forever. Recital of his victories in all the lands, to let all lands together know, to let the glory of his deeds be seen. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Benere Meremon, the son of Ra, Merenptah, content with Ma'at, the bull, lord of strength, who slays his foes, splendid on the field of valor, when his attack is made. Shu, the god of air, who dispels the cloud that was over Egypt, letting Egypt see the rays of the sun's disk, who removed the mountain of copper. Debt slaves were sometimes forced to pay back time in servitude with copper from the people's neck, that he might give breath to the imprisoned folk, who let Hut-Kaptah exalt over its foes, letting Chenen triumph over his opponents, opener of Memphis, gates that were barred, who allowed the temples to receive their foods, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Banere, Meremon, the son of Ra, Meremtah, content with Mat, the sole one who steadied the hearts of 100,000s. Breath entered their nostrils at the sight of him, who destroyed the land of the Cheme. In his lifetime, cast abiding terror in the hearts of the Mshwesh. He turned back the Libyans who trod Egypt. Great is the deed of Egypt in their hearts. Their leading troops were left behind. Their legs made no stand except to flee. Their archers abandoned their bows. Their hearts of their runners grew weak as they sped. They loosened their waterskins, cast them down. Their packs were united, thrown away. The vile chief, the Libyan foe, fled in the deep of night alone. No plume on his head, his feet unshod. His wives were carried off from his presence. His food supplies were snatched away. He had no drinking water to sustain him. The gaze of his brothers were fierce to slay him. His officers fought among each other. Their tents were fired, burnt to ashes. All his goods were food for the troops. When he reached his country, he was in mourning. Those left his land were loath to receive him. A chief ill-fated, evil-plumed. All said of him, those of his town, he is in the power of the gods. The Lord of Memphis, the Lord of Egypt, has made his name accursed. Mere is the abomination of Memphis. So is son after son of his kin forever. Banere, Meremon, will be after his children. Merenptah, content with Ma'at, is given him as fate. He has become a proverbial saying for Libya. Generation says to generation of his victories. It was never done to us since the time of Ra. So says every old man speaking to his son. Woe to Libyans! They have ceased to live in good manner of roaming the field. In a single day their stride was halted. In a single year were the Chehenu burned. Seth turned his back upon their chief. By his word their villages were ruined. There's no work of carrying loads these days. Hiding is useful. It's safe in the cave. The great Lord of Egypt, might and strength are his. Who will combat, knowing how he strides? A witless fool is he who takes him on. He knows no tomorrow who attacks his border. As for Egypt, since the gods, they say, she is the only daughter of Ra. His son is he who's on the throne of Shu. None who attacks her people will succeed. The eye of every god is after her despoiler. It will make an end of all its foes. So say they who gaze towards the stars and know all their spells by looking to the winds. A great wonder has occurred for Egypt. Her attackers were placed captive in her hand through the counsels of the godly king, who prevailed against his foes before Ra. Merej, who stealthily did evil to all the gods who are in Memphis. He was contended within the city of Anu or Heliopolis. The Inand, Egyptian deities, found him guilty of his crimes, said the Lord of all. Give the sword to my son, the right-hearted, kind, gracious Beneri Meremen, who cared for Memphis, who avenged On, who opened the quarters that were barred. He has freed the many shut up in all districts. He has given the offerings of the temples. He has let incense be brought to the gods. He has let the nobles retain their possessions. He has let the humble frequent their towns. Then spoke the Lord of On in behalf of their son Merin Ptah, content with Ma'at. Grant him a lifetime like that of Ra, to avenge those injured by any land. Egypt has been assigned him as a portion. He owns it forever to protect its people. Lo, when one dwells in the time of the mighty, the breath of life comes readily. The brave bestows wealth on the just. The cheat cannot retain his plunder. This too shall be said. Merej, the vile foe, the Libyan foe, had come to attack the walls of Tartanen, whose lord had made his son arise in his place, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Beneri Meremen, son of Ra, Merneptah, content with Ma'at. Then said Ptah concerning the vile Libyan foe, his crimes are all gathered upon his head. Give him into the hand of Merenptah, content with Ma'at. He shall make him spew what he gorged like a crocodile. Lo, the swift will catch the swift. The Lord, who knows his strength, will snare him. It is Amun who curbs him with his hand. He will deliver him to his Ka in the southern On. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Beneri Meremen, son of Ra, Meremptah, content with Ma'at. Great joy has arisen in Egypt. Shouts go up from Egypt's town. They relate the Libyan victories of Meremptah, content with Ma'at. How beloved is he, the victory's ruler! How exalted is he, the king among the gods! How splendid is he, the Lord of command. Oh, how sweet it is to sit and babble. One walks free striding on the road, for there's no fear in people's hearts. Fortresses are left to themselves, wells are open for the messenger's use. Bastioned ramparts are becalmed. Sunlight only wakes the watchmen. Medjay, Nubian soldiers, are stretched out asleep. Nau and Tecton are in the fields they love. The cattle of the field are left to roam. No herdsmen cross that river's flood. There's no calling out at night. Wait, I come, in a stranger's voice. Going and coming are with song. People don't lament the morn. Towns are settled once again. He who tends his crops will eat it. Ra has turned around to Egypt. The sun is ordained as her protector. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Banere, Meremen, son of Ra, Merenptah, content with Ma'at. The princes are prostrate, saying, Shalom. Not one of the 9 bows lifts his head. Chehenu, Libya, is vanquished. Kati, likely the Hittites, at peace. Canaan is captive with all woe. Ashkelon is conquered. Gezer seized. Yanom, a province in the north of Palestine, made non-existent. Israel is wasted, bare of seed. Kor has become a widow for Egypt. All who roamed have been subdued by the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. Banere, Meremen, son of Ra, Merimptah, content with Ma'at, given life like Ra every day. The United Nations that are being assembled here or put here under the captive of the ancient Egyptians show a vastness of understanding, communication, and mixture within this region. Clearly, from Syria all the way down to the Nubian and Libyan areas, there is a communication and a movement. And remember, he put Nubian soldiers also in the place of Syria. This is the important part. This is what people don't understand about ancient Egypt, which is that they didn't do their dirty work all the time. They hired people from outside their own nations, mainly Nubians and Libyans, mainly Nubians, really. But these Nubians, which we see also located as far as Crete, under the jurisdiction or under the guidance of the Egyptians, are sent far and wide, which is probably why one of those tales of Sennae mentions Nubians that far into Libya, and why Herodotus mentions the dark skin of the people located in Georgia. They could have just been officers of Nubia, but really they were Egyptians. We see this long stretching span of communication. By the way, this is about 1200 BC. This is before we get the true religious people of Judea and they start to come together as a group. You will notice that the Egyptians write very similar to the Bible that was to come later. Now, it's hard to repeat what other Egyptologists say, but I have to. It is quite obvious that people in the ancient world did not look at race the way we looked at it, or the way we look at it. Our bias today is so vast, and we don't even realize we have it. We think people would have looked at people today and saw exactly. It's obvious and real that no matter what anybody look like in certain areas, the groupings were not necessarily based on what we identify today. It's quite possible that the people in the ancient world, had they run into the Khoisan, they would have given them a completely new classification altogether. It seems like they did that with other parts within their own regions. It seems like they had divided Europeans into two groups. It seems like they divided the Middle East into two groups. The Ethiopians, they seem to have not have an extensive knowledge of the lands, but if they were to divide them into two groups, it would be the Ethiopians and the Egyptians, even though the people seem to be the same group, as they do with so many other groups. In this time, there's barely any mention of India. India starts to get mentioned way later. Research still has to be done on how early India is mentioned by the ancient Egyptians. Like, share, subscribe, and do all the other things.